Councillor Ian Edwards, Leader of the Council, and I'm Chairman of Cabinet. Not expecting a fire alarm. If one sounds, we will be evacuating the building. Colleagues, can I ask everybody to make sure their mobile phones are turned off or to silent, and welcome to this additional Cabinet meeting to consider the budget and school budget. Right, Mark, agenda item 1, apologies for absence, please.
Thank you. All Cabinet members are present.
Thank you. Colleagues, are there any additional matters of interest to be declared before this meeting? None indicated. Thank you. Approve the minutes of the last meeting, pages 5 to 14. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
And this is to confirm that there are only items in part 1, so the meeting will be held in public. We now turn to the substantive agenda items. Agenda item 5, the 2025-26 budget and future medium-term financial strategy and budget monitoring. Councillor Goddard, thank you.
Thank you, Leader. This item deals with the financial budget for the upcoming financial year 25-26 and sets out the medium-term financial strategy for the 5-year period ending 2029-30, and also addresses budget monitoring for month 9 for the current financial year. The papers for this are set out on pages 17 to 212 of this evening's order of business. I must start by apologising to colleagues for the late arrival of this item, which of course has triggered the need for this supplementary meeting. This has been caused by material changes to the budget as a result of the late arrival of the final settlement, and members will recall that not even the provisional settlement was available to us at the time of publishing the consultation budget. And also because of the assimilation of the very significant implications of the very recent latest set of financial forecasts generated by the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England. I'd like to start by making reference to the month 9 budget monitoring report for the General Fund. The budget monitoring process for month 9, December 2024, indicates an overspend against budget since month 7 of £1.2 million, which takes us up to a projected aggregate overspend for the full 24-25 financial year of £10.1 million. This will give rise to reserves available to carry over into next year of £24.5 million. This £1.2 million variance is attributable to further increases in adult social care placement costs of £1.1 million and an additional pressure on children's social care costs of £1 million. These two items being reduced by £0.9 million in terms of the maximisation of funding for corporate services costs. The aggregate in-year variance comprises a number of major factors, including overspending against service operating budgets of £4.9 million, the rebasing of cost budgets amounting to £14.1 million, and the underachievement of budgeted savings of £4.7 million. These factors have been offset by new savings identified and minor improvements in funding amounting to an aggregate £13.6 million. An adverse movement of £0.9 million has been identified on the collection fund, which is predominantly derived from pressures in council tax collections, offset by improved business rates collections. The housing revenue account, at month 9, the housing revenue account continues to maintain in-year parity with budget, albeit that this comprises an adverse variance in rental income of £600,000, offset by reduced financing costs of the same amount, derived from an underspend of £1.7 million against the capital programme. Turning to the schools budget, there is no change in the reported schools budget position from the position reported at month 7, which is a deficit of £17.3 million. This representing an £8.3 million improvement on the projected position as reported at the 23-24 outturn. I now turn to the 25-26 budget and the medium-term forecast to 29-30. As I said when I introduced the consultation budget to Cabinet last December, this budget has presented numerous challenges, and it has been necessary to introduce a higher than usual number of changes from the consultation budget to that which I submit to you for approval today. The 25-26 consultation budget indicated a budget gap of £6.4 million, which was to be set against reserves. This has been reduced to a gap of £4.2 million, largely as a result of increased grant funding as confirmed in the final settlement, amounting to £3.7 million, an increase of £800,000 in payroll costs as a consequence of the government only funding 80% of the increase in national insurance, the employer's national insurance, increased estimates of demand-led growth in budgets of £5.6 million, and a reduction in corporate items of £3.5 million, largely relating to refined capital costs and recharges, and an increase in the savings programme amounting to £1.5 million. A full list of the changes can be found in Table 6 in the notes for this meeting. Whilst a small improvement in government grants in the final settlement is of course most welcome, the medium-term outlook for grants is less than encouraging, particularly given the fiscal crisis that the government is facing. This forecast therefore anticipates that grant income will run flat over the forecast term. Population growth in Hillingdon exceeds the national average, but is not reflected in the funding which we receive, and hence we can expect static levels of business rates income. The lion's share of the substantial income which we collect in Hillingdon is taken by central government and the Greater London Authority, and there are no signs to indicate that these trends are likely to reverse or improve. The system for funding local authorities is widely accepted by many as broken, with a particular need for a new system of taxation to replace business rates, with a greater allocation devolving to councils. This creates a financial pressure which is added to by the ever-growing statutory obligations of councils in terms of social care, housing, asylum provision and waste disposal. The Chancellor's autumn statement has added to that pressurised environment, particularly as a result of the announced increases in employers' national insurance and the national minimum wage, the costs of which have been built into our budgets for outsourced contracts. We also now see inflation on the increase again, and this, combined with the sustained higher interest rates for longer, will continue to profoundly depress economic confidence for families, businesses and local authorities alike. This too has given rise to a revision in our cost estimates. As a consequence, we will continue to see increased demand and unit cost increases for very many of our frontline services, particularly in the areas of social care, housing, homelessness and asylum seekers. As I already pointed out to colleagues, these are of course not problems which are unique to Hillingdon. Budget overspends amongst councils in England are expected to amount to £6.2 billion over the next 2 financial years, and there is an ever-growing queue of authorities seeking exceptional financial support from central government. Hillingdon will not be joining that queue, nor will it be seeking government approval to increase council tax beyond the 5% referendum threshold. Instead, our strategic objective is to pursue a programme of self-help, which is directed towards cost savings, income improvement and increased commercialisation. It is clear that our reserves are far too low, and this budget and medium-term forecast set us on the path of materially strengthening them. Over the next 5 years, we will see our reserves more than double, from £20.3 million to £43.7 million. This is largely as a result of the vast amount of work which has been carried out within the last year, in terms of an examination of our costs and the opportunities for saving through our ZBB and Star Chamber programmes. This has generated a savings programme which will derive a projected £66.6 million across the next 5 years, with £34 million of those savings falling within 25-26. Given the stagnation in government grant and business rates income, it is essential for us to make use of the permitted increase available to us in council tax. Hillingdon has consistently over the years espoused a policy of low taxation, and the strongest expression of this was when we froze council tax for a period of 10 years. This has given us one of the very lowest levels of council tax in London, notwithstanding recent necessary increases which have all been under the referendum ceiling. Faced with the economic environment, it has been necessary to apply a 2.99% increase in core council tax, plus a 2% increase in the social care precept for 25-26. However, I must emphasise that this still leaves us with one of the very lowest rates of council tax in London. Fees and charges are also being increased across the board by a minimum of 5%, albeit that does not reflect the current level of CPI. This increase allows us to catch up on underlying delivery costs, which have increased as a result of earlier and higher inflation. It should also be noted that we intend to consult with residents on a charge for the collection of green waste, which, subject to the results of consultation, would be introduced at the 1st of April 2025. Our resultant fees and charges structure will still prove to be modest in comparison with neighbouring authorities, and will leave us still in the bottom quartile in terms of fees and charges per resident in London. Inflation adds 33 million to the authority's cost base across the 5-year term. Demand-led growth will grow our costs by 37 million, the major contributing factors being waste, adult social care, homelessness, SEND, transport and looked after children. Corporate costs comprising provisions for known and potential risks and exposures have added a further £35 million in 25-26 and cover areas such as the impact of employers' national insurance and national minimum wage on contracted out costs, cost rebasing, bad debts, concessionary fares and increased capital financing costs. We have a substantial capital expenditure programme of £342 million across the 5-year term. This programme includes £124 million of Invest to Save projects, which are integral to our savings programme. This entire programme will be achieved with a modest and affordable level of external debt, as Hillingdon continues to minimise levels of borrowing. Turning to the housing revenue account, rents will increase by 2.7% based on the prevailing rate of inflation, plus 1%, as at September 2024. An extensive capital expenditure programme directed towards regeneration, building housing stock and improving standards of accommodation will amount to £514 million across the 5-year term, and this will provide an increase on our building of our housing stock by over 1,000 units, which is 10% growth. All years indicate balanced budgets. This budget and forecast take account of the difficult economic environment which all local authorities face. It reflects a number of tough but realistic decisions, but it upholds our key principles of low taxation for our residents and the maintenance of key frontline services. I therefore move items 1 to 14 as set out on pages 18 and 19 of the Order of Business. Recommendations 1 to 3 commend the budget and the MTFS papers for adoption at Council on the 27th of February. Of additional particular note are item 4, which requests that the Council's Section 151 officer proceeds with the implementation of the financial improvement plan requested by me. Item 9, which requests that Cabinet note the budget monitoring report for month 9, 24-25, and item 14, which instructs the introduction of resident consultation as to the introduction of green waste charges and establishes a delegation for making a decision as to the introduction of a charging structure subject to the results of the consultation. In closing, I would like to thank the Chief Executive Officer, the Chief Operating Officer, the Section 151 Officer and their teams for their expertise and the extensive and thorough work which has been undertaken in generating this budget and forecast. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Goddard. Colleagues, this is a difficult budget, and of course I regret the need to consult on the introduction of green waste, but let's be very clear about it. The cause of that has been the government's failure to honour its undertaking to fully fund us for the employer's national insurance contribution and for the material worsening in the inflationary outlook as reported by the Bank of England. Those two issues alone account for the delay in forming this final budget and account for the change that has been necessary to bring forward. This is particularly tough. It has been an exceedingly onerous process on you, Councillor Goddard, and on your officer team, and you have done exceptionally well to bring us to this position, to develop a savings programme that will ensure our sustainability and growth in reserves in the coming years, and to ensure that we continue to provide quality services to our residents. Colleagues, are these 14 recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Next agenda item is the schools budget. Councillor Bryan?
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for the introduction for agenda item 6, the schools budget. This seeks Cabinet approval this evening for the provision of a range of block funding allocations for schools and early years provision following consultation with Hillingdon Schools Forum. The dedicated schools grant funding is set by the Council using the local schools funding formula, and the figures for 25-26 can be found at Table 2 and is also noted in Recommendation 2. as per the Council's legal requirement to consult with the Schools Forum on any changes to the school funding formula and the early years single funding formula. The Schools Forum rejected the Council's request to transfer 1.9% from the schools block to the high needs block for 25-26. This followed a disapplication request to the Department for Education, which was also disappointingly rejected. Last year, the DfE had at least granted the Council a 0.25% increase. Therefore, the budget had to be amended, another reason why it was deferred to this evening. The 0.5% representing schools block high needs retention now equates to £1.497 million, which is low. The impact of the reduced schools transfer funding is significant and continues to put a pressure on other areas within education, as well as notably the high needs block. To say that this is a blow is an understatement, as Hillingdon, who has long been a high delegator of funding to schools who retain very little for centralised school services, will have to consider the Council's position now moving forwards into 25, 26, 27, 28. Notwithstanding this, Hillingdon continues to manage the challenges arising from significant levels of underfunded demand from central government within the 0 to 25-year-old education envelope, and now the unacceptable levels of cost for independent and non-maintained special needs placement. I read recently that the cost has gone up by 164% between 2014 and 2023, just to explain the situation as to where we are now with special needs placements. The cost of inflation and the impending decision for the statutory override mechanism for the dedicated schools grant deficit, which is due to end on the 31st of March 2026. Education authorities have never had such unprecedented demands. The Council continues to drive forward with its SEND strategy, including the in-borough special needs pupil places, which are now starting to show a positive return, with all sectors including increased primary specialist resource provision and designated unit places, in secondary places, and an expansion of the post-16 places. With more places still to come on board, this is the beginning to reduce our dependence on the out-of-borough, independent and non-maintained special needs placements. As this paper was deferred from last week, recommendation 6 this evening is to request the chair of the relevant select committee to waive the scrutiny call-in period on the decision Cabinet makes this evening, as the call-in period overlaps with the date that the schools must be legally notified, which is the 28th of February. The early years allocation requires the Council to pass through a minimum of 96% of funding, compared to 95% of funding from last year. Following the previous Conservative government's decision in 2023 to expand the early years and childcare entitlement for eligible working parents, this year the Council has received an additional £11.4 million due to that further expansion of the offer. There will be an early years funding group at the end of February, and the Council is proposing some changes for 25-26, which are highlighted within the report at paragraphs 3.8 onwards of the paper. This consultation is ongoing, and recommendation 5 recognises this as a request under delegated authority to be determined under urgency provisions after the event, as the consultation should be concluded by the end of February, and hence we are this evening on the 20th of February. The recommendations are on page 213 and 214 of the paper, and I therefore move. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Brien, and thank you again for your leadership, and again the team for the work that they've done in better managing the provision of support for SEND and other pupils. The fundamental issue here is that, again, the government is not funding local authorities enough and not funding education. There has been a reliance upon local authorities to cover that cost through the deficit, and the government are not being clear on how they're going to manage it. Therefore, we have to protect our interests and say no more. The fact that the school forum have not agreed this block transfer adds to that issue, but ultimately the recourse now is to look at the level of services that we provide and to address that to bring the budgets back into balance. We cannot allow the deficit to continue to grow each year. I know that work will be in hand in the coming period. Colleagues, are these 6 recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. That brings the agenda to a close and the meeting to an end. Thank you very much.